Hey, everybody out there with us once again is Mark Collinsworth, our expert on the economy and also on Bidenomics. And we're here to talk about the latest Biden baloney, about the latest job reports and the unemployment rate. Now, Mark, according to the Biden administration, for May, the job report is 272,000 new jobs, and that's up to 155,000 that were estimated. So it's way above the estimate. Unemployment rate, however, is up a little bit to 4% for 3.9, but they're talking about that this overall is another indication that Bidenomics, even though they're not using that phrase anymore, that Bidenomics is working. Now, you say it's more Biden baloney. Explain.
I would agree with that. Thank you, Larry. So the unemployment numbers have always kind of been, we'll say, tricked out to a certain degree to make the jobs, the employment situation look better than what it really is. So give you an example. Every year the government goes through and does seasonal adjustments. I'll give you like Christmas as an example of those. They know people are going to be hired, additional people are going to get jobs at Christmas that are short-term jobs. They make an adjustment for those jobs and they actually calculate that a certain percentage of those people that get hired for the Christmas shopping season, even though they're going to lose their jobs after the shopping season, a certain percentage of those people are going to retain those jobs after Christmas. We both know that's probably not the correct answer. And even then, I'm sure the government probably overestimates that. So that's one of the tricks they use to make the jobs growth number look better than what it actually is.
Okay, but you're also saying that there's two standards that they judge by, and it has to do whether you're fully employed or employed for as little as 1 hour per week, correct?
Correct. The current unemployment that they use, I believe, it's referred to as the U5 report.
The
That
U,
report,
U5, right? U5.
U5, like yeah, Unicorn Five. Um, Unicorn is probably a good description for it. If you're working for only 1 hour out of the week, you're actually classified as being full time employed.
So is that the standard that they're using then?
That's the main number they look at these days. Used to in the old days, they used to have what was called the U6 report, and the U6 report you had to work 40 hours out of the week to be classified as actually having a full time job for the employment numbers. They still keep track of that number, and that number is actually the unemployment rate somewhere around 7.5 to 8%.
Oh, if you go by that measure.
If you go
So,
by the 40 hours a week, correct?
so what they're putting out then is highly misleading.
Correct. And that's also another thing on that. If you dig into the jobs numbers, the bulk of the job creations actually coming from part-time workers. They're not full-time workers in there, which basically goes back to supporting the 1 hour, working 1 hour per week.
And in addition, another question is what kind of jobs are being created?
Well, it used to be after COVID, it used to be in the hospitality sector. People would get in jobs back at restaurants, was just basically replacing people that got displaced from COVID and returning to their old jobs. They counted that as being a new job, which it really wasn't. Um, Here in the last roughly 15 to 18 months, it's been government jobs, and that's due to the Infrastructure Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, which is a funny name by it. I'll give you a perfect example. The IRS got an extra $80 billion to spend out of the Inflation Reduction Act. The IRS is on a huge spending spree right now, hiring new agents to come in and basically go through your financial records. That's where a lot of the job creation is coming from, is from government jobs. The U.S. government is the largest provider of jobs in the United States now.
Okay, so that's put in the mix as well, these government jobs. So again, it's not the type of report we used to get in the old days before they outsourced all the manufacturing and other industries to China. These are jobs that are, either part-time or artificially created by the government, and jobs that are seasonal. So, I mean, there's no real standard, conventional, traditional measure anymore of what the job picture really is.
Correct. It's very, very distorted. There's all kinds of tricks they use to make the numbers look better than what they are, which it all comes down to politics.
So is it improving at all, the economy?
No, the economy is actually starting to slow at a at a very noticeable rate. We just had some economic data come out earlier this week. That's what caused the stock market sell off. Is the economy is starting to really starting to slow, which is not good going into an election here in roughly 5 months.
Yeah, and yeah, I got a kick out of Bidenomics, which they were touting every other day. Now all of a sudden they don't use that word anymore. And we said when they first launched Bidenomics, we said, what kind of an idiot in the Biden administration promoted that? Not realizing that eventually it was going to bite them in the rear end when the economy wasn't measuring up, and they're pinning it directly on Biden with his Bidenomics. I mean, it was a crazy thing politically to promote it that way, which to me indicates out of touch a lot of the people around him are. I don't know if they're ideologues, I don't know if they're kids with no real experience, real life experience, and it's pie in the sky. I mean, I can't figure out, just in terms of practical politics, a lot of these moves are very ineffective. And case in point is using that term Bidenomics.
Well, yeah, that's just like stuff that, Joe Biden said, like a month ago, that when he came in office, the inflation rate was like 8%.
9%.
Well,
9%.
8%, 9%. No, if you actually look on the day that he actually came into office, the inflation rate was actually at 1.9%. So it went from 1.9 on the day of inauguration all the way up to 8%. And now it's come down to roughly 4%. 4% still double the 1.9 for when he took office.
All right, I've asked you this before, Mark, some months ago. Is there any way before November, before the presidential election this year, that they'll be able to improve the economy significantly for any kind of political gain?
The only two things that they could really do to help out the election, the big one is is to get interest rates down. So many people are hurting from mortgage rates being close to what, the 7.5%, 8%. Is for if the Fed cut interest rates, I think that would pretty much almost guarantee a a 100% win for Joe Biden. And the second thing is gasoline prices, which Biden's already tapping into the Strategic Petroleum Reserve to get gasoline because mortgage payments and gasoline prices are the two biggest things that consumers have to deal with every week to every month. So if those two things improve, that's going to dramatically, and I mean dramatically, improve his chances of reelection.
Well, the Strategic Petroleum Reserve that he keeps tapping into, it lowers the price of gasoline by a few cents, maybe 5 cents at the most, maybe in some places even 10%. Then it creeps back up. So, I mean, how sustainable is that to keep gasoline prices lower between now and November?
Well, it's just a political game. They're just, yeah, you're right. It'll only move gasoline down, 10, 15 cents. But in the end, think of all the advertisement to do. Gasoline's taking one of its largest drops of the year thanks to Joe Biden. Interest rates have taken the largest drop. These are all just political things. No, people don't really know. They hear stuff and they believe it's true. No, a lot of the stuff you hear in politics is very far from the truth. It's just there to make people feel good about that candidate.
So are you saying then that with the dip in gasoline prices between now and November and a lowering of the interest rates, it is enough to give Biden a significant political boost?
Correct, very much so. And not to forget, it's very hard, through history, it's very hard to beat an incumbent president. If you look through all the incumbent presidents in history, all of them that lost, we'll use Jimmy Carter, Donald Trump, George Bush Sr., all of them had one thing in common when they lost their reelection bid, and that was that there was a recession in the actual election year.
So you're still predicting, as you did several months ago, which surprised me, that you think Biden is going to win.
I think right now it still leans toward. Now we're still 5 months away. The economy could still easily slip into a recession here in the next 2 or 3 months. Um, and unless that happens, I think Joe Biden stands a very good chance of being reelected. But I will throw this out here to you also. The yield curve's inverted, and it's been inverted for almost 2 years now. This
Explain
will actually be the first
explain that yield
like
curve.
invert. When you say the yield curve's inverted, short-term interest rates that are less than 2 years are higher than the 30-year interest rates. So right now, the 30-year interest rate's about 4%. The 2 year or less is about 5%. So it's about 100 basis points above the 30-year.
Right.
So that means the yield curve's inverted. Historically, anytime that has happened with an inverted yield curve, you've had a recession, normally on average about 9 months. It has stretched out as long as 2 years. Well, come this month, we're now at the 2 year mark that's inverted. If we don't have a recession, does not start here in the next roughly 30 to 40 days, this will be the longest record on the history books that we've had no recession.
And again, further explanation, why does that inversion of the yield curve most likely cause a recession?
That comes down to bank lending. So the way banks lend money is they borrow money at the short end of the curve. So with a normal yield curve, the short-term interest rates are, let's say, 2%, and the long interest rates are, let's say, 4%. So banks will borrow that money at 2%, and then they'll loan it out as a mortgage at 4%. So they're making a 2% profit on the difference between the 2 and the 4. When short-term rates go above long-term rates, banks cannot afford to borrow money at 5% and loan it out at 4%. They'll take a 1% loss. So banks dramatically tighten up their lending standards and do not give people loans to go out and buy stuff. So that impacts car loans, it affects mortgages. If mortgages are not, if people aren't buying homes, think about how much, material, construction, people buying new furniture, new refrigerators, washers, and stuff. That has a huge impact on the economy.
Yeah. So, but Mark, others would argue that with the border crisis,
Mhm.
millions pouring into the country unchecked, with the crime in the cities increasing, with inflation still significant, uh, and all these other dysfunctions, even though it's the economy stupid, as James Carville famously said, won't these other issues that which show on the top of voters' minds in poll after poll, won't these other issues bury the concern about the economy? And the economy
Well,
itself is of a concern.
well, yes and no. So on the border stuff, just this past week, Joe Biden initiated an executive order about shutting down the border if more than 2,500 people cross the border. Well, a lot of people are going to hear that going, yeah, the president's actually doing stuff to fix the border. So that's a political trick that will get people brainwashed to believe that the president's doing something.
Even though that's a joke, at least according to Fox News, they're pouring over just as much as ever, if not more. So
Well,
it's
yeah.
effective.
Well, that's also a thing. There's so many other programs that bring illegals into the country outside of that. So, and then you say 2,500, you have to average 2,500 over what is it, a 10-day period?
Yeah.
Well, shoot. And those numbers could be manipulated. There's more than, I think last month, what, 20,000 people crossed the border? Well, how do you know that? If they're sneaking across the border, I mean, if you're watching people come across the border and you're counting them, you should be arresting them, right?
But what you're saying is, despite all that, it's not going to matter so much because most people are unaware of how bad the situation still is.
Well, correct. And if you break this down, the main thing on elections, it's really if you have a job and everything is hunky dory in your life, you will always vote for the incumbent party in office. If
But
things are not hunky dory,
it is not typical, a cross section of Americans that have steady jobs or jobs that pay enough. I mean, apparently, people, are very dissatisfied, trying to get ahead, trying to stay ahead. So, I mean, how does that compute? One thing gets the other. Although they may have a job, with inflation still significant, they feel that they're slipping behind. So, how does that play into your prediction that with the economy, people think they're okay? I mean, do they really think they're okay?
well, that's one of the things. It really comes down to a lot of brainwashing. You know, I want to say, who was it? Was it Hitler said one time, if you tell lies enough times, people will actually start to believe it. And
Yeah.
that's really what politics has come down. It's basically brainwashing. I'll give you a perfect example. Look at Illinois, for example, how bad the crime rate in Illinois as a whole, especially Chicago, has been for the last, 20 years.
Right.
But why do they keep on reelecting Democratic politicians to that region, even though every time they elect a Democratic politician, the situation gets worse and worse every time? Obviously, Illinois and Chicago is a perfect example. People are not learning from history.
So you don't think we're at a turning point where people are finally waking up and realizing that they've been had?
I don't think so. I mean, you got to think that's one of the sad things is that when it comes to elections, only about 35 to 40% of the population actually goes and votes.
Yeah, yeah,
And I think if you had 100% turnout in elections, I think it would actually shift dramatically towards, in this case, Donald Trump's reelection bid. But when you only have, 35 to 40%, and of that 35 to 40%, you know, 60 to 70% of those people voting are Democrats, they're going to vote Democrat.
yeah. So you don't believe the Republicans, at least some of them, the Trump supporters, are saying that this is at a turning point now. People have had it; they've had it up to here. They're finally going to throw the bums out. You're saying that is not necessarily the case.
That is not the case. And not to mention, not to say that there's like, election mischief going on, but we both know there's election mischief. There's a reason why the joke's been around for the last, what, 20 or 30 years. People say, you only vote Democrat after you die.
Yeah,
You remember that joke? There's a reason why that joke's out there. Just this past week, how many people were actually found in Detroit that's still on the voters registration that died, died 10, 15 years ago, but they're still registered to vote. And the Democrat that's in charge of Detroit refuses to remove them from the ballots. There's a reason for that.
well, I mean, do you think it's fair that just because a person dies, a good Democrat dies, his vote shouldn't count after that? I mean, that's kind of
Well,
unreasonable on your part, isn't
Well,
it?
that's the thing. I'm going to when I die, I'm going to make sure. Please don't let me vote Democrat after I dead because that's just it's the Democrats do a great job of brainwashing people. Give you a perfect example. My mother was a hardcore Democrat. And I sat there one time and I took the Democratic platform and I said, "Do you believe in these 10 things?" And she said, "Absolutely not. I don't believe, nor do I support any of those 10 things." I read off the Republican platform of the top 10 things. She said, "I agree with every one of those things." And I said, "Then you're a Republican." "No, Mark, I'm a Democrat and I will always vote Democrat." But yet you don't agree with the Democratic platform. I don't understand that.
Well, I think that's a throwback to the way the Democratic Party used to be, which
Yeah.
was more of a champion of the working class, or at least it was perceived that way. And that image has hung over, even though that's no longer the case. It's largely now special interests and elitists that are running the party for their own interests. But a lot of people don't realize that. Uh,
Well, perfect example on that. You go to one of these, you watch a Biden fundraiser on TV, you look, they're all, he's wearing a tuxedo. Everyone in the front of the room at these dinner tables are wearing tuxedos. And you can sit there and you can point out and name brand every one of those people like George Clooney, Bill Gates, all those people sitting there in the front row. You go to a Trump turnout, what do you see? I can't name a single person standing there in the front, and you see them wearing t-shirts, holes in their pants. You're right. The Democratic Party has now become the party of the billionaires, and the Republican Party has become the party of the working man. But yet the Democrats still sit there and go, "We're for the working man." It's just a mirage.
yeah. And it isn't ironic that a billionaire is now the leading contender for the Republican nomination for president. Donald Trump, a billionaire, relates better to the working class than the Democrats do.
Well, a key point there, you got to remember, Donald Trump worked his way up from the ground level, so he knows what it's like to be underprivileged. One of the things that they used to brag about is that he can actually go out, he's be in real estate and construction. He can actually go out and get in a bulldozer or a backhoe and run that thing.
Really?
I don't think Joe Biden can get in a backhoe or a bulldozer and actually operate it. Donald Trump knows that's why Donald Trump, I think, appeals to so many people is because he's worked elbow to elbow with those people and understand their needs. Whereas Joe Biden has worked in politics all his life. Um, Unless you believe some of the stuff that Joe Biden says, where he's been like the president of Zimbabwe or something, who knows? He lives in a totally disconnected world. I mean, he went to how many colleges has the man gone to? I've lost count of how many different colleges and how many different degrees he's appreciated. I've lost count of what law firms he's worked for. I can't. The one that really got me, he was raised by a black family. Have you heard that one?
I haven't heard that
I
one.
mean, yeah, he was raised by a black family. I mean, there's just such a disconnect.
Well, again, it's yeah, I'm still surprised by your continuing prediction that Biden is going to win a second term. We'll see. But
Well,
again,
we're still a long ways out there. A lot can change. But the big thing, if the Fed cuts interest rates between now and the election, it's going to be a major boost for them.
and you think it's likely that they'll cut the interest rates?
Oh, I mean, let's put it this way. If you were Jeremy Powell, you have a pretty cush job, right? Man, you're really a powerful person in the world atmosphere. Donald Trump's made it pretty clear he won't be Federal Reserve Chairman after if he becomes president. If you could cut interest rates and save your job, what would you do?
Yeah, yeah. Of course, cutting the interest rates will spike inflation again, but not probably before November, correct?
Not enough to make it, you know, aware, but that's nothing to this whole election thing with Trump that was clearly gauged to mark Donald Trump as a felon. So you've already heard that, the Democrats have already started saying, do you really want to elect a felon to be president?
Yeah, convicted felon. Yeah, the trial. Yeah, yeah.
And that, and here's the thing, for people that said, well, he got due process and all this, this is my main thing. How would you feel, whether Donald Trump did something wrong or not? The crime they basically took him to court on, the statute of limitations had already expired on him. Under the law says you cannot be tried for something. So no, if whether he did it or didn't do it, how would you feel? Put yourself in that same shoes. If the statute of limitations had expired on you and you got taken to court and found guilty of something the law clearly says you cannot be brought to court on because the statute has expired, how would that make you feel?
Yeah, it's not just that was so egregious. I mean, they're making up the law as they went along. Uh,
Yeah, that's
and the judge was clearly biased, and the prosecutor, was out to get them from the beginning. I mean, the whole trial was really a sham. And what I try to explain to people is whether you love Trump or despise him, you should be very alarmed about how they put him on trial, this show trial, because if they could do that to him, they could do it
mm,
to any of us eventually. People say, well, it won't affect me. But what they're doing is tearing down those checks and balances and safeguards that are built into the legal system and the Constitution. More and more, they're being pushed aside as things are being politicized. And that is a real danger to all of us. But I think a lot of people don't realize that yet.
and another thing out of that trial that really irritated me, and again, people need to put themselves in the same shoes. When there was this election interference thing was brought up, the FEC, the Federal Election Committee, already did an investigation in the exact same thing that Donald Trump was doing. And the election committee, these are experts in election fraud, right? They found Donald Trump, there was no case there. He didn't do anything wrong.
Right.
And to really cement this thing, and this is a violation, I think, of Trump's Sixth Amendment, when the defense wanted to bring the guy that was in charge of the FEC in there to say, hey, we didn't find Donald Trump guilty of any crimes. The judge refused that in there. How can you have a witness, an eyewitness account of if a crime was committed or not, and you deny that witness to take the stand to put his side on there, but yet you'll take a previous lawyer, Michael Cohen, who was basically had his law license stripped from him because he lied under oath to get on the stand and then to make up additional lies about Donald Trump. How does that happen?
Yeah, and also there's some of the other outrages. The jury didn't have to be unanimous in finding what crime he
Oh
allegedly
yeah,
committed. Whoever heard of that? You don't
I
need.
mean I never. Yeah, I mean, and people, and then what irritates me is people listen to CNN all the time, and they CNN reporters say how he got a fair trial and everything. No, he didn't. I would love to take that CNN reporter and put them on Donald Trump's seat right there and have the process go the same way. It was a complete sham.
Well, that's another thing. CNN and most of the other major mainstream media, they're so slanted that and the question is, do they realize they're doing it, or are they that dumb? I don't think they're that dumb. I think it's part of the agenda, and they all have to conform to it, or they have to leave, or they're fired. And I think most of them willingly enjoy doing this because of their mentality about Trump and uh, the elite approach to things. So, but that's a topic for another day.
Yeah.
But okay, so Mark Collinsworth of Vere Global Wealth Management is still predicting that Joe Biden will be re-elected for a second term. We'll see.
But I really honestly hope it changes. But right now, like I said, recession has been the main indicator on knocking a president out of the spot. We'll see.
What I think, Mark, my final closing remark is whether the economy turns around enough to help them at the end, even though it's all smoke and mirrors, I think they'll find some other way to stop Trump because considering everything they've thrown at him so far, they're not going to stop. So something else is going to happen where they're going to be preventing Trump from being president. I think that's a strong possibility as we head towards November. Mark Collinsworth, thanks for being with us, and we will continue this very interesting analysis. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you, Larry. And as always, people don't worry. It's always the darkest before it gets really freaking bad.
Thanks a lot, Mark. See you later.
All right. Thanks.